Hey guys, today I'm going to tell you about 10 books that I highly recommend and absolutely love. Howl's Moving Castle by Diana Wynne Jones. Howl's Moving Castle is about a girl named Sophie who is cursed by the Witch of the Waste and becomes an old woman. What I like about Diana Wynne Jones is she creates this fairy tale-like setting but with more realistic characters. You know, instead of a Prince Charming, you have a wizard who is shallow, vain, and childish. It's a really enjoyable read and I highly recommend it. Bitter Sweets by Rupa Farooqui. Bitter Sweets tells the story of 3 generations in a family that are just caught up in their own lies. Eventually the main character realizes the folly of what's going on and endeavors to stop the lies that are happening in her family. What I like about Rupa Farooqi's novels is that the situations don't necessarily change so much as the characters. I really like character development, so highly recommend. Mortal Engines by Philip Reeve. Mortal Engines is set in the future where the world has been ravaged by a great war and has basically turned into a wasteland. The big cities that we know and love, like London, have become moving cities. They're set on wheels and they go around and basically they eat smaller cities and take away their scraps and their resources and their people. It follows Tom, who somehow finds himself thrown out into the wasteland with a girl named Hester. What I like about Mortal Engines is the element of realism that Philip Reeve puts into it. The girl named Hester has a disfigured face, and Reeve accurately describes how it would feel to travel around with someone so grotesquely ugly. It sounds really depressing, but he describes it so well, and I mean, it doesn't stop Tom from falling in love with her, but it's a more realistic kind of love than, oh, I love you, despite everything. Yay. Highly recommend. Alice in Wonderland by Lewis Carroll. The story, as you probably already know, follows Alice as she's drawn into a surreal wonderland and antics ensue. I like the book version of Alice in Wonderland way better than the movies. The movies never really captured me, but I really like how Lewis Carroll takes you into this surreal place and describes it to you. And sometimes it's a bit confusing, but you're no less confused than Alice herself is, so it sort of draws you in even more. Highly recommend. Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. Jane Eyre is not your typical romance novel. In Jane Austen books, you often find a boy and a girl, and there's antics, but in the end they end up together. Whereas Jane Eyre is about much, much more than that. It follows the story of Jane as she goes from being an orphan girl living with her aunt, to a lonely girl in a boarding school, to a nanny in the house of Mr. Rochester. What I really like about the book is that it would have been equally as good if she had not ended up with Mr. Rochester at the end. The romance becomes second place to the story of Jane herself and her growing as a person and her life growing in God. Highly recommend. Treasure Island by R.L. Stevenson. Treasure Island is your typical boy's adventure. A young boy comes across a pirate and antics ensue and a search goes on for the missing treasure. I really like Stevenson's plain and simple way of explaining things. You know, you can have fun, but you're not caught up in the details or it's not too elaborate. It's very easy to understand and very fun to read. Highly recommend. Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy by Douglas Adams. Arthur Dent is a completely ordinary human, and then his planet is destroyed. Antics ensue. I really love Douglas Adams and his writing style. His satire is so humorous, so funny, you'll find yourself laughing out loud as you're reading it. It's just so good. He takes completely ordinary situations and turn it into something profound and just hilarious. Highly recommend. 5 Children in It by Edith Nesbit. 5 Children in It is about 5 children who are playing in the countryside one day and come across a sand fairy. The sand fairy agrees to grant them 1 wish every day, and the wish will only last until the end of the day. Children being children, they don't really make the wisest of choices for their wishes, and of course, everything inevitably goes wrong and antics ensue. What I like about Edith Nesbit is she writes about children, but the children she writes about act like actual children. I think Edith Nesbit understands what it's really like to be a child, but also she describes it in such a way that we as adults can really understand. Her stories have a nostalgia about it. As we read her talking about these kids, we remember what it was like for ourselves to be kids. And I like that. Highly recommend. The Windsinger by William Nicholson. The Windsinger is about Kestrel and Bowman as they grow up in a state where everything is based on exams and your performance is evaluated and basically counts for how you live. If you're successful, you live in a big, grand house near the centre. If you aren't successful, you live on the outskirts in a wooden shack. The story centres around Kestrel as she tries to deny the status quo, but things only get worse for her. What I like about The Windsinger is it's your typical kid's adventure, but it also has elements of your typical dystopian society. As you are reading, you can just feel the frustration that Kestrel is going through. You start getting anxious about what's happening. You start getting frustrated that nothing can change, that she can't do anything to fix things, and you are totally rooting for her. You are on her side, and you are feeling what she's feeling. Highly recommend. The Amazing Maurice and His Educated Rodents by Terry Pratchett. I can say, without a doubt, this is my #1 favourite book. The story is about Maurice the cat and a bunch of mice who eat from the magical waste left behind at the Wizards University. They not only develop the ability to talk, but to think like us humans do. Maurice the cat, being the mastermind behind everything, adopts a human boy and they go from town to town tricking people with a mouse plague and a Pied Piper. When they reach Bad Blintz, they vow that it would be their last town. But for some reason, everything keeps going wrong. I absolutely adore Terry Pratchett's writing. It's such beautiful satire, such imagination, and just the absolute wonder that comes with it. No matter how many times I read this book, I never get sick of it. It is set in the Discworld, as most Terry Pratchett novels are, but you don't need the Discworld context to understand the book. Extreme recommendation. Well, those are 10 books that I highly recommend you read. Leave a comment down below if you have any books that you want me to read, and I'll read them. Feel free to like and subscribe if that's what floats your boat, and I'll see you next week. Bye!